I never thought my passion for solo camping would lead me into the heart of a murder mystery, but that's exactly what happened during my trip to Glacier National Park in Montana last summer. As an experienced backpacker, I'd chosen a remote trail in the park's backcountry, seeking solitude and the raw beauty of nature. The adventure began on a crisp Monday morning. I parked my Subaru Outback at the Polbridge Ranger Station, double-checking my gear and signing in at the backcountry office. The ranger on duty, a grizzled man named Tom, eyed me warily. "Heading out to Akakala Lake?" he asked, glancing at my permit. That I nodded, excited about the 12-mile hike ahead. "Be careful out there," Tom warned. "We've had some strange reports lately. Probably just wildlife, but..." He trailed off, leaving the sentence hanging ominously. Brushing off his concern, I shouldered my Osprey backpack and set out on the trail. The first few miles were breathtaking, winding through dense forests of lodgepole pine and western red cedar. The scent of wild huckleberries filled the air, and I spotted a few white-tailed deer grazing in a meadow. As I climbed higher, the terrain became more challenging. I crossed several swift-moving streams, carefully picking my way across slippery rocks. By late afternoon, I was deep in the backcountry, surrounded by towering peaks and pristine wilderness. I reached my designated campsite near Akakala Lake just as the sun was setting, casting a golden glow across the water. Exhausted but exhilarated, I quickly set up my mountain hardware tent and prepared a simple dinner on my camp stove. As darkness fell, silence descended on the lake. No loons called, no owls hooted. Even the usual chorus of insects seemed muted. I tried to shake off the growing sense of unease, attributing it to fatigue and isolation. Sleep came fitfully that night. I tossed and turned, plagued by vivid dreams of shadowy figures moving through the trees. I awoke at dawn, groggy and disoriented, to find my campsite shrouded in a thick mist. As I emerged from my tent, something caught my eye, a flash of red against the gray rocks near the lakeshore. Curious, I moved closer, my breath catching in my throat as I realized what I was seeing. It was a backpack, not unlike my own, torn and blood-stained. Beside it lay a scattered array of camping gear, a shredded sleeping bag, a bent trekking pole, a smashed GPS unit. My heart raced as I surveyed the scene, which bore all the hallmarks of a violent struggle. I fumbled for my satellite phone, but the screen remained stubbornly blank. No signal. I was alone, miles from civilization, at what appeared to be a crime scene. Fighting down panic, I forced myself to think logically. I needed to document everything before moving anything. Using my camera, I took dozens of photos, careful not to disturb the area. As I examined the scene more closely, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. A set of footprints leading away from the site, too large and deep to be human. My mind raced through possibilities. A bear attack. But the precision of the destruction, the careful arrangement of the items, suggested something more deliberate. Something intelligent. I spent the next hour meticulously searching the area, looking for any clue that might explain what had happened. In a nearby stand of trees, I found claw marks gouged deep into the bark, higher than any bear could reach. And there, caught on a branch, was a tuft of coarse, reddish-brown hair, unlike anything I'd seen before. As the morning wore on, the mist began to lift, revealing the true scale of the wilderness surrounding me. I felt exposed, vulnerable. Every rustle in the underbrush, every snapping twig, sent a jolt of adrenaline through my system. I knew I needed to report my findings, but the thought of hiking 12 miles back to the ranger station, potentially crossing paths with whatever had done this, was terrifying. I decided to wait until noon, hoping my satellite phone would find a signal. Those hours of waiting were the longest of my life. I packed up my gear, ready to move at a moment's notice. My eyes constantly scanned the treeline, searching for any sign of movement. At 11:43 a.m., my phone suddenly chirped to life. With shaking hands, I dialed the emergency number I'd been given. The connection was poor, full of static, but I managed to relay my location and a brief description of what I'd found. "Stay where you are," the dispatcher instructed. "We're sending a helicopter. It should reach you in about an hour." Those 60 minutes stretched into an eternity. I paced the campsite, jumping at every sound. The sun climbed higher, burning off the last of the mist and revealing a landscape that now seemed alien and hostile. Finally, I heard the distant thrum of rotor blades. As the helicopter appeared over the ridge, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. But that relief was short-lived. As the aircraft descended, something enormous burst from the treeline. It moved with impossible speed, a blur of reddish-brown fur and gleaming claws. Before I could even cry out, it had vanished back into the forest, leaving behind only a cloud of dust and my own pounding heart. The park rangers who arrived were professional and thorough, but I could see the disbelief in their eyes as I recounted my story. They documented the scene, collected evidence, and evacuated me from the area. In the weeks that followed, I was interviewed multiple times by park officials and local law enforcement. They had no explanations for what I'd seen, no records of similar incidents. The physical evidence I'd photographed was inconclusive, they said. The hair sample I'd collected had been contaminated, rendering DNA analysis impossible. Gradually, the investigation went cold. No missing persons were reported in the area. No additional evidence was found. It was as if the entire incident had never happened. But I know what I saw. I know something is out there in the wilderness of Glacier National Park, something that defies explanation. And I know that I'll never look at the great outdoors the same way again. As the months passed, I tried to put the incident behind me. I returned to my job, my normal life, but the memories of that day at Akakala Lake continued to haunt me. I became obsessed with researching unexplained phenomena in national parks, spending countless hours scouring online forums and obscure books. Then, 6 months after my encounter, I received an anonymous email. The message contained a single image, a grainy trail camera photo of a creature that matched exactly what I'd seen that day. The metadata showed it had been taken in Glacier National Park just 2 weeks ago. At the bottom of the email was a simple message. "The truth is out there. Are you brave enough to find it?" I sit here now, staring at my camping gear, wondering if I have the courage to return to those remote wilderness areas, to seek answers to questions that perhaps should remain unasked. It was late summer, and I had been looking forward to this camping trip in Killarney National Park for months. The lush landscapes, serene lakes, and enchanting forests of County Kerry always had a way of recharging my spirit. I set up camp near the shores of Loch Lean, the largest of the 3 lakes in the park, with the majestic MacGillycuddy's Reeks mountain range providing a breathtaking backdrop. On the second day of my stay, as I was hiking along a trail near Macross Abbey, I encountered a distraught couple. They were frantically calling out a name, their faces etched with panic. I approached them, asking what was wrong. They introduced themselves as Liam and Fiona O'Connell and explained that their 6-year-old daughter, Aoife, had wandered off while they were setting up their tent, and they couldn't find her. I offered to help. We retraced their steps, calling Aoife's name and searching every nook and cranny of the forest. Hours passed, and there was no sign of her. The sun was beginning to set, the park rangers joined the search, and a sense of dread hung heavy in the air. As night fell, the search was called off until dawn. Liam and Fiona were inconsolable, and I couldn't bear to leave them alone. We sat by their campfire, the crackling flames offering little comfort. I told them stories about my own childhood adventures to keep their minds occupied, but their eyes kept drifting into the forest, hoping for any sign of their daughter. Around midnight, an eerie calm settled over the campsite. The wind ceased, and the usual nocturnal sounds of the forest were absent. It was then that I noticed something odd. Across the lake, a faint, flickering light appeared. It wasn't the steady beam of a flashlight or the glow of a campfire. It was more like an old lantern, swaying gently as if carried by an invisible hand. "Did you see that?" I whispered, pointing towards the light. Liam and Fiona turned to look, their faces pale in the firelight. "Maybe it's Aoife," Fiona said, her voice trembling with a mixture of hope and fear. We decided to investigate. We crossed the lake in a small rowboat I had brought with me, the oars dipping silently into the water. As we approached the opposite shore, the light vanished. We disembarked and made our way through the dense undergrowth, guided by the occasional rustle of leaves and the dim glow of our flashlights. After what felt like an eternity, we stumbled upon an old, abandoned cabin, half hidden by the encroaching forest. The door creaked open, revealing a dark, dusty interior. There was a distinct feeling that this place had been untouched for decades. As we stepped inside, the floorboards groaned under our weight. And then we heard it, a soft, melodic humming coming from the far corner of the cabin. I directed my flashlight towards the sound, and there, sitting on the floor, was Aoife. She was unharmed, but her eyes had a distant, glazed look. "Mommy? Daddy?" she murmured, her voice barely audible. Fiona rushed forward, scooping her daughter into her arms, tears streaming down her face. Liam followed, his relief palpable. I scanned the room, trying to understand how Aoife had ended up here. As I did, I noticed something chilling. Old photographs scattered on a dusty table. They were black and white, showing people dressed in early 20th century clothing. One photograph caught my eye, a family, standing in front of the very cabin we were in. The parents looked stern, but the child in the picture bore an uncanny resemblance to Aoife. We left the cabin, eager to put it behind us. Aoife seemed to come back to herself as we crossed the lake, her eyes losing that distant look. She told us she had followed a lady with a lantern, who promised to show her a secret place. But when they reached the cabin, the lady disappeared, leaving Aoife alone. Liam and Fiona thanked me profusely, and we parted ways the next morning. I couldn't shake the feeling of unease as I packed up my own camp. Before leaving, I took one last look across the lake. The cabin was barely visible through the trees, but I swore I saw a faint light flickering in the window. Years have passed since that night, but the memory lingers. Every time I hear about a missing person in Killarney National Park, I wonder about that cabin and the strange, timeless presence that seemed to haunt it. Some things are best left unexplained, and some places are best left undisturbed. I always loved the idea of camping in remote places, far from the noise of civilization. So when my friend Mark suggested a trip to Devil's Lake in North Dakota, I jumped at the chance. The lake, known for its eerie beauty and rich history, seemed like the perfect spot for a weekend of fishing and relaxation. We arrived on a Friday afternoon, the sun casting a golden hue over the sprawling waters of Devil's Lake. The area was more secluded than I had imagined, with only a few scattered campsites and dense woods surrounding the lake. We set up our tent near a small cove, where the water was calm and the view was breathtaking. The first night was uneventful. We cooked our dinner over a campfire, swapping stories and laughing as the stars appeared overhead. The isolation was comforting, a welcome break from our hectic lives. As the fire died down, we turned in, eager for a day of fishing ahead. The next morning, we took the boat out onto the lake. The water was smooth as glass, reflecting the clear blue sky. We spent the day casting our lines, catching a few fish, and enjoying the tranquility. By late afternoon, we decided to explore the area around our campsite. Mark mentioned an old, abandoned cabin he had read about, hidden deep within the woods. Intrigued, we set off to find it. After an hour of hiking, we stumbled upon the cabin. It was a dilapidated structure, overgrown with vines and surrounded by tall, swaying trees. The door creaked as we pushed it open, revealing a dark, musty interior. Dust particles danced in the beams of sunlight filtering through the broken windows. The air was thick with the scent of decay. Inside, we found remnants of the past. Old furniture, a rusted stove, and a bookshelf filled with yellowed books. Mark uncovered a faded photograph on a table, depicting a family standing in front of the very cabin we were in. Their faces were solemn, almost haunting. As we explored further, a sense of unease began to settle over us. The cabin felt wrong, as if it was holding secrets we weren't meant to uncover. We decided to leave, but before we could, Mark noticed a trapdoor partially hidden under a ragged rug. Curiosity hit us, and we pried it open, revealing a narrow staircase leading into darkness. We descended cautiously, our flashlights cutting through the pitch-black void. The basement was cluttered with old tools and crates, and the air was colder damp. In the corner, we found a small, makeshift altar covered in cobwebs. On it lay a collection of strange objects: animal bones, dried herbs, and a worn leather-bound book. Mark picked up the book and began to flip through its pages. It was filled with handwritten notes and drawings, detailing rituals and incantations. The more he read, the more disturbed he became. It seemed the previous occupant had been involved in some sort of dark practice, something beyond our understanding. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the basement, causing us to jump. We spun around, our flashlights darting across the room, but saw nothing. The sense of unease grew stronger, morphing into a palpable fear. We decided it was time to leave. As we made our way back up the stairs, the air grew colder, and a faint whisper seemed to follow us. We hurried back to the campsite, the woods around us growing darker with each passing minute. By the time we reached the tent, night had fallen, and the wind had picked up, howling through the trees. That night, sleep eluded us. Every rustle of leaves, every creak of the tent seemed amplified, setting our nerves on edge. Mark and I talked in hushed tones, trying to rationalize what we had found in the cabin. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and we drifted into a restless sleep. I woke up to the sound of footsteps outside the tent. Groggy and disoriented, I nudged Mark awake. We listened, our ears straining to catch any sound. The footsteps grew louder, circling the tent. My heart pounded in my chest as I unzipped the tent flap, flashlight in hand. The beam of light revealed nothing but the empty campsite. We spent the rest of the night wide awake, huddled together, every sound putting us on edge. As dawn broke, we quickly packed up and decided to leave Devil's Lake. The beauty of the place had been overshadowed by the dread that now clung to us. Driving away, Mark and I barely spoke. The memory of that night stayed with us, an unspoken bond of shared terror. Weeks later, I researched the history of Devil's Lake and found a mention of a family who had lived in the cabin during the early 1900s. They had vanished without a trace, leaving the cabin abandoned. To this day, the thought of that cabin in the woods sends a shiver through me. The secrets it held, the dark rituals performed there, remain a mystery. And every now and then, I wonder if the whispers we heard were the voices of those lost souls, trying to tell their story.